We come to the third presentation of 2014, the Parayana, the way across. And literally in our new era, our new aeon, the way across is for our species to leave our planet and go across to other abodes, other habitats. And the very first one was to go to the moon. Not the moon, because we now know there are hundreds of moons in our star system. So our moon's name is Luna. And because it's Luna, from Luna, our planet is not Earth, but Terra. So those that live there are terrestrials. And those who don't live there are extraterrestrials or non-terrestrials. And so a whole new language that is not a jargon. What used to be good language now is in dire jeopardy of being jargon. And nothing is more important than to be mindful, much less careful, of the way in which we speak and write and read and listen. And the speaking and listening is in this new time form has to be differential. It can be integral, it can achieve a balanced unity, but it is a balanced unity that comes to an opening. And that opening is for all of the other possibilities, of all the other possible worlds. And so one of the great titles of early science fiction story collections, they began in 1946. Groff Conklin did a big book on science fiction, and within a couple of years, he put one out every couple of years. He had one of all possible worlds. So that the differential language of speaking and listening, of writing and reading, has all possible worlds if you are able to circle back, or better, instead of the jargon circle, to use the term loop. If we loop back, we begin to understand that what is being spoken and heard involves something more than an identification ear. It requires for us to transform and to have a prismatic ear. When we listen to a great performance of great music, there is so much beauty and fruitfulness of possibility. It is astounding, and no matter how many times one comes to appreciate that, it's still incredibly impressive. I remember one time when I was a professor in Canada and had season tickets to the Calgary, Alberta Symphony. Made a lot of money in those days. And there was a performance by Mikhail Rostropovich playing his cello with a 105-piece orchestra. And it was interesting because one outheard him against 105 other instruments. It was extraordinary that the subtle, sinuous timbre of the cello and his form, he was not that big a man, but when he was playing, He was like a giant squid or octopus that had emerged from an ocean of possibility and was here in presence, and one shared that presence with him. On the other hand, I remember the evening after it was known that President Kennedy had been killed. The San Francisco Symphony was supposed to play that night, and the guest orchestra was the London Philharmonic, and it was directed by Malcolm Sargent. And Sir Malcolm said at the beginning to a packed house that everyone was sad and struck and in deep melancholy, and the orchestra as well, I imagine. And he said, as musicians, what we can do, instead, in lieu of canceling this performance, is to give it and invite the spirit of JFK to be with us. And to the extent that we are successful in that, we will be able to hear Sibelius's Second Symphony tonight. And it was so incredibly moving. The presence of Sir Malcolm and the London Philharmonic and the San Francisco audience was like an infinite ringing of a grand bell, of a call that all who were in hearing, be they phenomenal or spiritual, to participate. All are welcome on that grand scale. Hearing a differential language requires someone who is speaking a differential language to be appreciative that one's looping around is not only coming back but going forward. And that double looping takes away the possibility of drifting in a chaos. Because if you run, according to chaos theory, well understood now for the last generation, if you run a chaos fast enough, long enough, it assumes a double attractor quality to it. It becomes the wings of the dove, as it was in the beautiful epistle to the Hebrews by Apollos in the New Testament. And the wings of the dove is the Holy Spirit hovering to not only descend and come down, but in suspension to invite a participation. And it's that participation with the invitation of a trans-cosmic spirit that we are able to hear in an infinite looping the layers upon layers upon layers into whatever distance we are able to bring ourselves to be able to appreciate and to have ears to hear. The same for reading. To be able to not quickly read to get the point, to bag the information, to move on and on and on, and like a highlight game, be able to just turn those pages or click that mouse or whatever it is, and to be able to settle into a continuity that takes the frame, the square of attention, the frame of reading, and put the diamond of consciousness into play along with it, so that one gets a kind of a ultra transcendent kung fu, that it's not about force, it's about presence. And That is what is going on here. We, at all beginnings of a major new time form, I call it a carrier wave. It happens once every 2,000 years. A carrier wave, when it first comes in, is so startlingly differential that its encompassing of the integral cycle is overwhelming because one doesn't know where to start. One doesn't know whether to start with the pinnacle, which is the symbolic mind that tries to individually be accurate and precise in its identification, and the explication is exacting. Or whether one should start with the mystery of nature and what is there before there's a there, before there's a here. And there certainly has to be a there before there's a here. Time precedes space, but zero, field, fertile, precedes time. And so one says that such and such a thing is timeless, or that we enter into eternity, that we proceed to the lucidity of the fertile emptiness, that there is such a thing as vacuum pressure. When it is condensed, a vacuum that is just a pure vacuum in condensation becomes capable of spontaneous generation of particality. Not only do electrons come spontaneously into play phenomenally, but they also are absorbed spontaneously out of play. And not just electrons, but all of the qualities of an electron, which is the muon, the tau particle state, the positron, and its negative complement to the muon, its negative complement to the tau, to the neutrinos that accompany all of these leptons and all of their stages. All of this is spontaneously generated by bringing an integral motion into play within what would have been a vacuum. It was empty, and now it is productive spontaneously. And whatever spontaneously emerges, if it can be sustained, so that its absorption is not spontaneously occurring, then time makes instantness, and instantaneity becomes the first quality of cinching the universe as we know it. Then, when time cinches space in its integral quality, and what integrates space better than gravity? And gravity plays that kind of integrality. We're looking at something which is the Parayana, the crossing over. Some could translate it as going beyond, but beyond has become a jargon. It has become a language term like unity or like completeness. There is unity, there is unification, there is completeness. But moving across from completeness, one comes to an infinite field where completeness transforms twice over and becomes perfection. There is so much, and we're taking an entire year to take our time to tune our ears, and for me to tune my voice to be for a while, for all who hear, a Sir Malcolm Sargent or a Rostropovich, to do a presentation. Not for the marquee, but simply to do it in shared presence. There is a great undercurrent at the beginning of each new time form. Not only the 2,000 years, but the 1,000 years. In the middle of the 2,000 years is a pivot called a millennium. There's a millennium, and then there's that pivot, which is millennial, and then there's another millennium, and then you have a new carrier wave. And that always seeks to have its tunability harmonically with the previous carrier wave, from 0 BC to 2000 AD. And that becomes the great question then that dissolves the issues that came up in the millennium. But at the beginning of a new carrier wave, there is always a snagging, especially at that first transform, which is the fermentation. Not just in alchemy or in psychology, but in the way in which vision works. A fermenting so that one can begin a transform out of the fruit of the vine into the wine of the heart. And to have it done really well so that one could take the really fine wine of the heart and put it through a second transform, which is the distillation into the spirit. And so one calls anything distilled from something fermented spirits. There's always snagging at the beginning. This morning, there was on a news program a question to somebody, why does New Jersey's Governor Christie go to the governor's conference in Florida to speak? Is he not afraid to go there and talk to all of these powerful PAC fundraiser people who are jamming this together? And aren't the governors concerned about this? And the reply by the very proper 1950s style businessman, he might have been a Rotary Club or any business club chairman, he said, look, for the fundraising, it's all behind closed doors, it's not public. It's not public? Excuse me? What country do you think you're in? Who do you think you are? Who do you think we are not to know? Which is why Hermetic America needs to be reintroduced so that the looping absorbs those snags and makes the presence shareable and makes a continuity so that there is something unbelievably important. And that is that the schizophrenic split between the past, your history, and the future, it's got to be this way, dissolves the snag of the present now. That is the badge. We don't need no stinking badges. And the hallmark hallmark of the ego distributing that that's over and this is up for grabs. So when presence absorbs and dissolves the present now, the future and the new past are a continuity again, and they flow kaleidoscopically into freedom beyond belief. That's what we're doing. One of the great writers of the 20th century was Stephen Jay Gould. And in 1997, he published Questioning the Millennium, about the way in which the coming year 2000, Y2K, was supposed to be the millennium, and that one needs to really take a look at this and what is this? And the subtitle of Questioning the Millennium is A Rationalist Guide to a Precisely Arbitrary Countdown. There, Gould was not only a great Harvard professor who refused to constantly just live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but kept his New York digs because he was a New Yorker. And he loved being a New Yorker who went up to Harvard to deliver his beautiful lectures. And when he published the great 21st century magnum opus of his, The Structure of Evolutionary Theory, it's almost 1,500 pages in 2002. So he submitted it to Harvard University Press on the millennium in 2000. And we'll get to more of Stephen Jay Gould, but this is something that he wrote. But why invoke such general themes of mental ordering and natural randomness to begin a small book on particular questions about the millennium? I start here because the basic concept of the millennium in Western culture arose from two of the great mental strategies that we use to wrest order and meaning from a recalcitrant world. Moreover, and more particularly, the central shift of meaning that defines our current millennial madness from millennium as apocalypse to millennium as calendretics can best be understood as a change of emphasis from one mental strategy to the other. That's not true. It sounds wonderful, and he is a great writer. There's no doubt whatsoever, and has tremendous insights. Our Shared Presence Library has about 25 volumes of his work, and so forth. His co-writers, they formed the Three Musketeers. One was a woman from South Africa originally, Elizabeth Verba, B-R-B-A. The other was Niles Eldridge. And one of the things that those two of the musketeers surviving the death of the third musketeer, of Stephen Jay Gould, published a special edition of paleobiology, Paleobiology Volume 31, and its whole issue was devoted to macroevolution, diversity, disparity, contingency. And this macroevolution volume we use in the Learning Civilization program because it is colossally sophisticated. And with Niles Eldridge, Stephen Jay Gould put a presencing into evolutionary theory that for almost 150 years had been building on Darwinian bases. But as Stephen Jay Gould points out in the evolutionary theory of 1,500 pages in his commentary, Darwin himself in 1859 put a coda on his theory already, and he emphasized that the record of geology is incomplete. Hence, the record of what is preserved in fossils, in the evidence that paleogeology would use, is incomplete. And even now, by the 21st century, we're beginning to realize how incomplete it really is, still, and growing. That there is a contingency which grows faster. It grows geometrically to the way in which the solutions, the integrals, grow in a cardinal series, so that the ordinality of possibility continues to outstrip the tethering of certainty. A man named Alan Guth, about a generation or so ago, startled the world of astrophysics by pointing out that the evidence is conclusive now that the universe is speeding up its expansion. That the expansive universe is there in every cross-correlation of every record that we are able to fold together, and that the deck is no longer stacked the other way. It's not a static universe. It's not a shrinking universe. It is an expanding universe. That some trillion years into the future, the star systems and galactic systems and so forth will be so far apart, it will be almost impossible with seeing, to be able to see stars, or with telescopes to see galaxies. All of that is a part of a mirroring of a mentality which misconstrues the meaning. The energy of the universe has everything to do with time. So that distance, in terms of a universe, is actually, the convenient term now is light years. Light years. MC, mass, times the speed of light, is energy. But it's not just E equals mc, it's E equals mc squared. There is, in Einstein's incredible differential consciousness, a recognition of a kaleidoscopic second transform of this. One of the great physics concerns that has been trustworthy for a couple of hundred years is the computation by least squares in physics. And that the squaring applies to space and spatial orders and spatial qualities of ratioing and resonance and so forth. But it is paired, like one of the double attractors of chaos theory sped up so that it becomes the butterfly effect, the other wing of that butterfly is not only the squaring of space, but the tripling of time. That the ratio of space squared and time cubed, that ratio has as its fundament 1. And if you take a progression of squaring space and tripling time together as a ratio of the real, whatever can be observed there will be able to have the consistency of a oneness in the universe and a zeroness in high Dharma consciousness. The way in which the planets in our star system circle our sun, our star, is that one can plot the squares and cubes of each of the planets and they form a particular kind of resonant set, a harmonic. Kepler was one of the first to be able to understand that this is so. And because that is so, it was understood after Newton that there then is something left over. There must be planets that we have not seen, like the one that was found in 1781, Uranus, by a brother and sister team in England. We'll talk about them a little bit later in another presentation. But that there must be a further planet, an 8th planet. And the search for that 8th planet finally reached fruition in 1846 with the discovery, because one knew exactly where in that orbit this planet should be at this time, at that distance. And that was Neptune. But again, there was a tail end, that the squaring of space and the tripling of time into a ratio of the real showed that there was yet a 9th planet somewhere out there, but would not be visible by any means except that it would be a point of light that would move against the unmoving stars. Actually, the stars do move, but so slowly at that distance that for our whole survival, they don't move at all. But there will be a point of light that moves against the unmoving stars. And it wasn't until 1930 that a young, I think he was in his early 20s, and when Clyde Tombaugh patiently, night after night, took stereoscopic slides of the night sky at the distance that that 9th planet should be, at the time distance that planet should be, that point of light, he began to notice that there was a slight movement of that point of light. And Clyde Tombaugh in Arizona found Pluto. This is on the net now. It's on the Daily Galaxy. This is an artist's conception of what the surface of Pluto will look like, which we will be able to see next year. Because the New Horizons space probe will reach Pluto in 2015. And we will be able to see the only other double planet in our star system. Because the moon of Pluto is 1/3 the size of Pluto. Pluto is about 1,200, 1,300 miles in diameter, and the moon Charon is about half that, about 600, 650 miles in diameter. The other double planet is Terra Luna, our Earth, using the old jargon, and our moon form a double planet. form a double planet in the way that Pluto and Charon form a double planet, so that it seems that the parentheses of our star system is that there should be a conscious double planet in close among 4 rocky planets, and Pluto should be the closing of 4 giant gaseous planets. And very soon, about a generation after Tombaugh found Pluto, a Dutch American, very much a Hermetic American, named Gerhard Kuiper, realized that Pluto was not alone out there, that the math showed that its mass, its time in its space-time orbit was not enough. There must be many, many, many Pluto and Charons out there. And so the Kuiper belt is named for Kuiper, Gerhard Kuiper. To celebrate it, the University of Chicago Press put out a series by Kuiper. And the first volume was The Sun as a Star. And the next volume was The Earth as a Planet. And then he went on to the stellar systems that are on the verge of a discovery that the interstellar frontier is a swirl with vast energies, meaning incredibly kaleidoscopic time dimensions, and also kaleidoscopic space dimensions, and that we are just now beginning to come out of the cradle and endlessly rocking, as Whitman wrote in Leaves of Grass. Let's take a little break and we'll come right back.